Dan, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Udikap. I'm Dan. Rabel Wonks. Currently chef of Tartine Sycamore. Also chef of Budonoki, which is a new izakaya concept we've been working on with some people, popping up all over LA. Born and raised in LA, obviously Thai American. What else? A Catholic school educated all my life. And then decided after working in business, I didn't want to do that anymore. So I went to culinary school at Le Cordon Bleu in Pasadena before it closed down. I went there, I graduated, and then started working in the industry right away. Cut my teeth really at Bouchon, Beverly Hills for 8 years. Started off picking herbs and doing all the prep work, and then left there as the executive sous chef. Which is kind of like one of the crowning achievements of my career, I think, being able to work for that group and for that person, for Thomas Keller. And then just kind of like, working around LA here and there, worked at Hayato a little bit, Subaki, just with some old colleagues from the Bouchon days. And then now here we are.
Dan, tell them about your mom's Nam.
Oh, my mom's Nam. My mom's Nam was like kind of this thing back in like in the 80s and 90s here in LA. She was quite famous for it, and she named it Namprida after my brother. And she made it out of the house. As we were kids, we would see her making it all the time with her two hands only, no machines, nothing, wrapping everything by hand. And that's how she kind of raised us, that's like what she brought to the table while my dad went to work, full 8 hours, whatever. So that was the legacy that she had that kind of, as a cook now, I'm trying to bring back. I've been playing around with it and trying to remember it. It's had its difficulties because my mom is still around, but she has dementia, so it's hard to ask her, the subtleties and the nuances of what she did, so it's been interesting. It's been an interesting ride trying to figure it out.
You're killing it. You're killing it.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it comes out great. Sometimes it comes out not so great. I don't know. Maybe the weather. Maybe I should try the car method like Vanda, like Alyssa.
We just came off of a collaborative dinner,
Yeah.
and amongst a group of Thai American chefs, including Dan, and one of the girls, Alyssa. She's chef. She's chef de cuisine at Republique, also Thai American. Her parents make chicken nam because they don't eat pork, and the secret to that is they store it in their car to get like the right temperature. So maybe that's
The fermentation, yeah.
the fermentation. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah.
And then Mark, Ajan, Ganjana, Joy, you can chime in. Do a quick intro.
Yeah, I guess we'll go in that order. I'm Mark Padoongpatt. I am an associate professor of Asian American Studies at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, or UNLV. Also born and raised in LA. So my parents met in LA. I was born in Hollywood, but then moved to the San Fernando Valley, right near Wat Thai. So I grew up as a Wat Thai kid. And yeah, I wrote my first book was on the history of Thai food in LA and the way that food shaped Thai American identity, but also Thai American community, and just the way that food plays such an important role in bringing Thai people together, but also how American society saw us and the way that we tried to navigate that, right? The way that people just see us through our food first and what that means for the community. So yeah, I'm just listening to Dan. And we've already had a conversation, but I'm just excited to be here and really grateful that I get a chance to learn from you all and just to listen from you all. I almost feel like I just want to sit back and learn about your experiences. So yeah, that's me.
And Professor Mark, is that a picture in your background of any significance?
to my own personal life, yes, this is my Zoom background, but it's from the show Insecure on HBO. And so it was the first couple of seasons. This was Issa and Lawrence's apartment in Inglewood. But also personally, when I was finishing my PhD at USC, I lived like just about a mile away from this apartment. So it's kind of like takes me back to the Inglewood days a little bit in grad school, but also one of my favorite shows.
Are you wearing a food shirt, Mark? I need to know what that bottle is on your shirt.
Yeah, so this is one of my cousins, my cousin-in-law. She lives in Chinatown, New York. And so she sent me this shirt of the Thai grocery store in Chinatown. And so I decided to wear it today as,
nice.
You know, to match the vibes.
And I'm teaching days of the week right now, so I have to wear one tan si leung. You know, I have to wear.
Yeah.
I'm trying to. I have to inception my students. So, hi, my name is Kantana Tulentunaina. And I am a professor of Thai language and Thai culture here at Northern Illinois University. And I literally just realized, just through our pre-meeting actually, that I kind of got a PhD in Thai language to like spite the puyai, you know, because they were always saying how like we're not Thai enough, our Thai isn't good enough. So it's like a very like long game middle finger. It was my research assistant who actually summed it up that way. She was like, you kind of had a long game middle finger to the elders in your community. I was like, wow, I didn't realize I was that spiteful. But yeah, so, you know, we deal with our ethnic and linguistic insecurities in different ways. I went full academic with it. So now I get to slap my credentials all over the papa at the what, you know, who like to criticize my friend's Thai. And I am a child of a Thai restaurant. So when I read Mark's book, I actually shed actual tears. I cried because it was our story, you know, and I always get emotional talking about your book. Sorry. So my mom came as an exchange professor at the University of Wisconsin and saw an opportunity, you know, that if she wanted anything good to happen to us, we needed to come like to the land of dreams, right? And so she had us come here. We overstayed our visa. She opened a Thai restaurant. So it was like the book laid out, right? Into our life. And so I always have a very close relationship with food. And so it's interesting teaching about it now from a linguistic point of view as well. My research focuses on Thainess as a notion, how it's performed, how it's understood, how it's transmitted across generations, how it's regulated and defined, both historically and in the present. And so Thainess, you know, began abruptly. So I focus when Thainess started to be constructed by a particular regime, and then look at how that plays out when we bring it with us to the diaspora. But I was born in Bangkok, and I came here when I was 10. So I'm kind of, I get to bridge our parents' generation, the first gens and the second gens, because I have passing ability in both. And I feel very lucky, and I take that responsibility very, very seriously, because the adults will listen to me, right? Not only am I an Ajahn and Dr. So-and-so, my Thai also doesn't mark me as different from them. And so whenever I can, I try to amplify kind of our generation's voices to the older generations in a way that they can understand what it is that we go through as racialized people, right? But I'm also very privileged in having grown up in Thailand as an ethnic, linguistic, religious majority. So I know what that feels like. And I carry that with me here, even though that wasn't my experience growing up in Wisconsin. So I'm trying to do a lot of things in my research to make that an experience for everybody.
Oh, is it me? Hi. I'm Joy. My Thai name is Nantaka. I put my maiden name on there so you guys can know for sure that I was Thai, because it's a little confusing with my married name. I grew up in Philadelphia, born and raised to parents who had Thai restaurants my whole life. My dad had, although they came to the States to take their masters, he was very frustrated with like the normal corporate world and decided to start a Thai restaurant with 4 other partners because they couldn't afford to do it by themselves. And so one by one, they started with 5, and my dad slowly bought out each one of his partners until he was the only owner. We started in Chinatown, Philly with the first restaurant, and then they eventually expanded to having 4 Thai restaurants at one point in my life. So me and my brother were the kids who grew up in the back, folding napkins, making Thai tea, answering the calls, making reservations, explaining to people what the food was. And, you know, it was very much a part of my life. And while I'm not in the food business now, I mean, I can appreciate everything that goes into it, not only on the business and the food end, on the culture end, everything, because it was really just my life for such a long time that was deeply cemented into me. So I am now a designer. I have a lifestyle brand called Oh Joy. I met Vanda through somehow the internet, like a long time ago. I'm a big fan of hers, and not only her food and but what also she represents and how she's been trying to bring, just have these conversations. I think especially in the last year, being Thai American, and I'm sure we've all struggled with this, even Asian Americans I know wholly, just sort of identity things where you are born in America, you want to be American so bad. I know for me, I wanted to have blonde hair and blue eyes, and I really pushed my culture away for a lot of times. I remember Wednesdays was the day I would go to the temple with my dad, and he would wake me up early and we have to take the food to the monks. And like, I hated it. And I was like, why do I have to do this? None of my white friends have to do this. But it's funny, you appreciate those things later in life, and you wish that you could have taken that appreciation back to your younger selves and said like, oh my gosh, you understand what is here, like how amazing this is. So I'm happy to be here to moderate this conversation today and meet all of you.
Thank you, Joy. Should we get started? I mean, did everyone get a chance to review kind of the Google Doc that was kind of put together by the conversation I had with Professor Mark and Professor Ganjana? Anyone wants to add anything additional to that? We can review it briefly before we start.
I was wondering real quickly, Vanda.
Vanda, your name is Vanda, right? Not Wanda. Is there how? I just want to make.
Vanda, yes.
Vanda. I was wondering, Vanda, since you mentioned my background, I was thinking if this gets kind of circulated via social media, would it be better if I just used a different background and just blurred my background, so that way there's no like, hey, you're using an image from the show?
Do you? I don't know. I'm always about doing you and being your most authentic self. I met you with this background the first time we Zoomed. So keep it going. I mean, Joy, do you have any stylistic advice?
Well, where are you right now? What does your real background look like?
Oh, it's just I'm just in my office, so it's actually not a bad background.
Yeah, if it's not a bad background, then do your real thing.
Yeah, let me see if I can just.
I'm promoting Nong Cartoon's artwork by a Thai American artist.
Yeah, so it's just.
Oh, that's great. Oh, that's great.
It's a really good background.
Yeah.
There.
Should I blur mine? How do I blur it?
No, don't blur it. I like the real thing.
All right.
Because the blur makes it almost look like it's virtual. Yeah, that looks better.
Okay. So let me just, in case anybody decides to walk all up in the kitchen, I can angle it.
And it would be a propose, right? We're talking about food.
Yeah.
It would be totally okay if somebody's back there.
Someone cooking back there. All right, I think that should be good.
I know that there's an outline with questions, which I will refer to and ask everybody. Now, it says, Vanda, I think you and I talked about this. It sort of says who is going to address it in like a brief outline. Is this stuff that you guys already talked about?
Stuff we kind of talked about, stuff that
Okay.
like, would be fitting into those questions. Just like a food for thought.
Okay.
If we veer off of that, it's totally fine. And
Okay.
again, it's being edited. It's going to be edited to like a shorter version, and then to 3 short kind of videos of each of the questions. I think the 3 questions has a timeline to it too, like the past, the early like 80s, and then the present right now. So it kind of has a timeline to that. And anything else that comes up, you know, we'll edit through it. Yeah. I want
Okay.
to have fun, enjoy, be honest, speak your mind, you know. So, and Joy can moderate through.
Okay, so we really just have 3 main questions, which it sounds like in many cases 2 to 4 of you will speak up on. I'm gonna let you guys sort of go and chime in rather than feeling like I need to call on each individual person, because it is conversational, and you know, somebody might say something and then you're like, oh yeah, blah blah. So I'm gonna kind of just let that happen, because this is different than like a live panel where certain things, new things may come up. We have an intention behind this, and we have certain things that are planned with the edits. Vanda, do you want any sort of intro? Like, do you need something for the beginning of these to sort of introduce the group, or are you going to take from our introductions we already did?
I think we can probably take from the intro, but maybe you want to start again with just, you know, Thai American food and identity panel.
Okay.
And maybe we can all just introduce ourselves.
Yeah, like a shorter version.
Yeah,
what you would say.
Version, first
Right.
and last name, you know, who you are briefly. Like I can start first if you like. But
okay, so what I'll do is I'll introduce, we have it recorded, I'll say who I am, what this panel is, have you each do a quick introduction, and then we'll go with the first.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Hi everyone, I'm Joy Dang Dealer Cho. I'm so happy to be here today for a Thai American food and identity panel with some amazing people who are all going to introduce themselves. Vanda, do you want to start?
Yes, hi, my name is Vanda Asapahu. I'm the chef and owner of Ayara Thai in Los Angeles. I'm also a 2nd generation restaurateur.
Hi, my name is Dan Rabelwonks. I'm also a Thai American current chef in Los Angeles, working on a couple different concepts right now.
Hi, my name is Kantanate Parirak, and I'm professor of Thai language and culture at Northern Illinois University. I'm a child of a Thai restaurant.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Padoongpatt, Associate Professor of Asian American Studies at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and also Thai American, born and raised in LA.
And I should also add, I'm also a Thai American, born and raised in Philly, now living in Los Angeles, and also the child of Thai restaurants. I'm excited to get into this conversation with you all. So let's start with, how is Thai food introduced to the rest of the world?
Well, let's go back a little bit further, before food, right? Well, maybe not before food, but it is the moment when Thainess start. So what's interesting about Thainess is that it abruptly started on June 24th, 1933 officially, which growing up Thai, you don't think that that's the case. You think it's always something that's been around. But on that day, June 24th, 1939, Field Marshal Jampon Paw Pibun Songkram, he introduced this first cultural mandate, so first of 12 cultural mandates, that declared everyone who lives within the current political border of what was known Siam at the time to be Thai. It also changed Siam into Thailand, and it actually erased all hyphenated identities. So if you used to identify yourself as Muslim Thai, you're now Thai. Or if you used to be Chinese, you're now Thai. So in a very interesting way, our people began to be Thai on a particular date. And then the other cultural mandates built on that and try to create this new thing, this Thainess, in several ways. So one of the ways was define when we should eat, what we should eat, how we should live, how we should divide our days, how we should dress, what we should speak. So two related mandates, when we think about food, would probably mandate number 5, which said that Thai people should use Thai products. So Thailand, being in the middle of all of these great empires, the Chinese Empire, the Khmer Empire, the Mon, Burmese, Lao, Malay, we always had a melange of cuisine, especially in the port town like Bangkok or Ayutthaya. But in trying to build this Thainess, the government said we should only use Thai products. Right. And so that's when Thai food really started to get codified into something that was uniquely Thai. So you see the birth of Pad Thai during that era. I think we all are familiar with Pad Thai. And if we really think about it, Pad Thai is the only dish that has the word Thai in it. Right. There's no other Thai dish that has to announce itself as, hey, I'm Thai. But it's betrays the background, right, of how that dish came to be. And then another mandate that relates to that is mandate 11, which is historical record to show that Thai people were eating more than 4 times a day, because the mandate states that we should not eat more than 4 times a day. So if that's a reflection of your life, that's okay. You're just doing it the traditional way.
Yeah, and I guess I can kind of take over from that moment, right? So like 1930s, 1940s, Thainess becomes kind of institutionalized in the Thai government. And I guess the spread of Thai cuisine to the rest of the world, we'll focus on the United States, because I think the US after World War II, right around the 1940s and 50s, is the new global leader, right? Like they've defeated Japan. And so the US is kind of tapped as the next world leader. And so the origin of Thai food and how it gets kind of brought over to the United States, I think it happens in three main turning points, right? Three main ways. The first is that Thai cuisine, the history of Thai cuisine in the United States doesn't actually start when Thai people physically step foot in the United States. It starts when the US goes to Thailand and US intervention in Thailand during the rise of the Vietnam War, or the events leading up to the Vietnam War, right? So the United States has a deep interest in establishing good relations with Thailand during the 1950s and 60s, because they're concerned, the State Department is concerned about the spread of communism. And so as part of that, the US starts to build all of these cultural exchange programs, all of these relationships on the ground in Thailand. So not just at the government level, but like tourism, the Peace Corps. And so all of these US citizens, and I call them ordinary citizens because they're not government officials or military officials. So they start making their way to Thailand, learning all of these recipes, collecting them, and then publishing them and sharing them in the United States like a decade before any large number of Thai people even get there. And so the first Thai cookbook, at least that I found on record, is called Siamese Cookery. And it was published in 1965 by a white woman in West LA. And she wrote this book, published this book, and shared it with all of her, at the time, kind of suburban housewives or suburban neighbors. And so that was really the first moment, right? And I think it's important to start there to show that like the food came here not because of just immigration and like immigrants bringing their food culture with them, but that it was part of larger global politics. And then in the 1960s and 70s is when you start to see Thai restaurants open up throughout Los Angeles, in East Hollywood, down near Linwood, where Thai people were going to school, because a lot of Thai people came to study in the United States. They were all over LA, all over Southern California. And so you start to see all of these like restaurants open up everywhere, and then it becomes concentrated in the West Side. Right? So anybody from LA knows the West Side is, one of the wealthier. This is Beverly Hills. I mean, Dan knows this. It's Beverly Hills. West LA is one of the wealthiest and whitest neighborhoods in Southern California. And by 1970, there's like over 50 restaurants on the West Side alone. And so that's when you start to see it become both more popular, but also somewhat of a trend, right? You have celebrities and people in the movie industry, the music industry, trying Thai food for the first time, and giving it some cultural cachet. And then I think by the well, I'll back up and say the 1970s were also important because of the opening of the Bangkok market, right? By Pramod Tilakamongkun, who opened the Bangkok market in 1971 and brought the ingredients, the Southeast Asian and Thai ingredients that restaurants could use, that home cooks could use for the first time, and made it widely available and consistently available, right? Because this was a year-round supply of Thai produce, Thai ingredients. And so you could rely on that market to keep your restaurant running, basically. So those are, I think, the key moments. And then, yeah, I'll stop there for now.
No, the Bangkok market. I mean, I think for us as a Thai American family living in Los Angeles, was our bread and butter. My parents came in the early 80s, actually mid 80s, and definitely Bangkok market and the Tila family was like our best friend because it was the source of all food. And I remember like the Khanom Kok in front of Bangkok Market. Dan, do you remember that? Like, and you would just hang off the side to like wait for the Khanom Kok because it takes so long to make.
Yeah.
But definitely a hub of gathering. I feel like it's the hub equivalent to that of Wat Thai for many Thai Americans in Los Angeles.
Yeah, and I think, before the Bangkok market, right, there was just like Thai people had to be so creative and innovative to create dishes because, Bai Makrut wasn't available. You couldn't grow it in the United States because it was seen as a threat to other citrus. And so people were like smuggling it in. People were, traveling 60 miles to Riverside to pack it, like take it off some trees, I think from UC Riverside, bring it home, freeze it, pack it, and then use it to cook and for curry paste. And so there was all kinds of creativity going on among Thai cooks and Thai chefs.
Yeah, I mean, my dad says it all the time. Back in the 70s when they came, there was nowhere to get makrut, and like all the unique ingredients like ka and all that, just like it's like impossible. And then when the market came, it finally was kind of like that segue for them. But now it's like, even back then it was like super expensive, and it was like, oh my God, it was like such a hot commodity. And now we have a garden with 2 trees in the back. It's like my dad's always making like sayings like, oh, we're growing money in the backyard now, because it's just like, look at all this wealth that we never had. And like, look at it, it's just like flourishing. I'm like, I don't know what to do with it. There's so much fruit and like leaves, So I even try to incorporate that into some of my food at Tartine, for a little bit.
I think a sign Dan of a Thai homeowner, like, I mean, the American dream is to own your own home.
Yeah.
The Thai American dream is to own your own home so that you could grow magut tree in your backyard. And so that it's something that you settled in and you're going to be living here forever because it takes so long to grow.
Yeah. And
we also have 2 trees in our backyard. Yeah.
The first one they grew is like way tucked in the back corner because they were afraid people were going to steal it. Like, honestly, this is a serious concern for them. It's like, we can't just have people coming off the street and just picking our makrut because this is our thing, So it's literally in the back corner. It's funny.
And I can confirm that. So I grew up in Wisconsin, so makrut didn't make it to us for a while. And the struggle was real. And the nearest place for us to get nampla, bai makrut, ka, horapa, anything that you want to eat was 3 hours away in Chicago. And we would make these monthly pilgrimages down to Chicago just to get the pu khao tong soy sauce for your fried egg in the morning, just something so simple, and should you, for whatever reason, fail to make a detailed list, and you like slept on the fish sauce on your list, oh well, you know, next month, we're gonna have to wait till next month until my mom can take off work to do that. And I absolutely can confirm the ton makrut, because even as a homeowner in Illinois now, which is not the ecological system in which makrut can thrive, I've got 2 of them suckers in pots. And I drag it in and put it out over the summer, and I put it back in, and it's, yeah, I can confirm that is still a thing, even in Illinois. It's
irreplaceable.
Amazing.
Yeah, there's nothing to really match that flavor. And it's in everything. We put it in literally everything. It's great. I love it.
All right, well, we talked about how it took a while for some of the ingredients to be available, but what were some of the other struggles of early Thai restaurants in America?
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched on it a little bit, right? I mean, I think, how do you create a market for a cuisine that no one knows anything about, right? And I think, I don't know if it's so much of a struggle as much of it is just kind of, you know, opening the kind of similar struggle opening up a restaurant, where I think that first generation of Thai restaurateurs opened up these Thai Chinese restaurants, right? And so kind of using Chinese names as a front, Thai Chinese food, or even just like Chinese food as a front to get people in the door. And then as they're eating, they would slip them a little Thai dish, right? And say, hey, I know you like, you know, you seem to be liking the chow mein, but have you tried kutil? Kutil, right? Like, try this out, or try latna, or something. Like, it's just like a little, a way to get people in the door to introduce this new cuisine. And we all know, of course, that, you know, the flavor profile of Chinese cuisine and Thai food is so different. But I think Thai restaurateurs were playing with that kind of Orientalist view of Asian people as kind of just, they're all Orientals, they're all kind of the same. And so they really used that and played with it, even though we know that there are Thai Chinese or ethnic Chinese Thai people. My read of that is that, you know, Thai people sort of understood how American society viewed Asians, and this could be a way, really creative way to introduce Thai cuisine.
It made it approachable, I think, right? Just like tacking on the Chinese aspect, which was already familiar, and then just kind of segueing that into like the society, like, you know, getting white people to kind of understand what this food is very gradually, right? But it's like, hey, it's similar to Chinese, but not really, you know. But I think that's how it got started, right? Because I think like there was a little bit of that fear, like, oh, people are not gonna like our food because it's very strong flavors, it's very intense, you know, spicy, all that good things, you know.
Yeah,
I remember as a kid working in my parents' restaurant, because I would answer the phones and I would give menus to customers, and they would ask me as a kid, well, what is Thai food? You know, I remember when we first opened in this one sort of suburban area of Philadelphia, we were the first Thai restaurant that anyone had ever tried. And they were trying, and there was a line at the door because it was this new fad. It was this new thing. And so as a kid, I would say, well, it's sort of like a mix of Chinese and Indian, which obviously we know it's not really, but it's sort of, you know, you can some of the noodly dishes or some of the savoriness, you could sort of connect to Chinese food, but then some of the spice and some of the other flavors you can connect to India, which obviously they both have influences also. But as a kid, it's so interesting how you have to describe it in some way to someone who has never had those flavors before.
And my mom opened her restaurant quite late. I mean, again, Midwest, right? Midwest time frame. So we opened in '94. And at the time, we were the 3rd Thai restaurant in Madison, Wisconsin. And as with any new business, and, you know, we all know that you have to differentiate yourself somehow from the existing places. And so the first place was opened by an American man who was married to a Thai woman. And so it very much did what Mark described, is that it tried to make it accessible as much as possible. And it had the unfortunate location of being next to the owner's veterinary clinic. So it fed a lot of those negative Asian stereotypes, you know, and I remember people joking about it, like, oh, that's why it's there, you know. And and all of the Thai restaurant owners subsequently in Madison worked at that restaurant. And then we slowly opened our own. All of my aunties and uncles, slowly opened our own. So by the time my mom's restaurant came about, she had decided to not Americanize anything, right? Anything, which was kind of a bold move in the Midwest in the 90s, because they honestly were not ready. And she grew up in the South. So their dishes, like khao yam, right, which comes with nam budu, which is like not at all accessible even to some Thai people from other regions. It's just fermented fish juice that you put over this amalgam of ingredients. And she also had pat satay, right? And we were a big hit with the Malaysian students and the Indonesian students, because we had all of the gapi flavor. We had all of the fermented everything flavor that they missed. That no other restaurant like dare serve. So that was kind of our point of pride. But there was always this division, right? What would the Thai, Malaysian, Indonesian, Singaporean, international students at UW-Madison order? And then everything else that everybody else ordered. But we had that opportunity to be able to do it more authentically, in quotes, air quotes, right? Authentically, as much as we can in the Midwest. And to go back to the money tree, right, or the Thai money tree of being the kaffir lime leaf tree. I remember picking up the kaffir lime leaf at the one Asian grocery store that we'd finally got in town, who would drive to Chicago on our behalf and then upcharge it so that we can get wholesale. And we would pick up, and I had learned Spanish at the time, and all of the employees working the loading docks, for the restaurants were all Spanish speaking. And I remember the main guy, he knew I spoke Spanish, so he could always ask me questions. He'd be like, what is this stuff? Because he would unload it and he didn't know what they were, which was ironic, as I think many of the ingredients were, grown in Mexico where he came from, but obviously not for him, right? But he would ask, and I said, oh, this is, it's a type of lime tree that we have in Thailand. It's kind of bumpy. We use it in curries. And he was said, why does it cost more than drugs? And he's like, do you even put this in? How could you put this in food? It's so expensive, and my mom never wanted to use less than the required amount. And I'm sure we'll talk about this later. So that made our price point a little bit higher, than the rest of the restaurants, because she was like, this dish requires 8 to 10 kaffir lime leaves. That's what we're going to go in there. And it was just like, 8 to 10 lime leaves in the 90s was like making it rain on somebody's pot picking,
I mean, this is something that, I argue in the book, and I really want to hear from Vanda and Dan about their experiences, even as second generation, for immigrant restaurateurs, and even the people who racially represent an immigrant, right? So even though we're born here, racially, we sort of represent this, an immigrant community, that they're confronted with the reality of race in America, like immediately. And even opening a restaurant, you have to navigate the racial context, right? Because you can't even just say, I want to cook the food I love, right? Because then it's like, well, will people like it? And then how will people see us as a people? And then as a community. So you bear the weight of a lot of this responsibility of like, if I just cook whatever I want and people think it's gross, or you're kind of afraid to introduce it because you don't know if they're gonna like it or how they're gonna see you. I think all of that is something that is, I think a lot of Thai immigrants faced early on, and that you just can't separate that reality of the way that society sees you racially from the food that you cook, because it's written on your body, right? Like, the fact that they were already kind of making that a connection between the veterinarian office and your food, right? Is like, now what, like, you have to think about like, well, can I just cook whatever the hell I want? Or is this going to come across as, and so I don't know. I'm wondering, and Dan, like,
I think, my parents started our first restaurant in East LA in the 80s. It was a little bottega. I don't think it was permitted. It was like the former meat station turned into a cooking station with a lot of random furniture. And they, I think that struggle of cooking what you want and cooking what you have to pay the bills is definitely like a struggle then and now. And being Thai Chinese, like the Thai Chinese restaurant, I remember during that time, there was a print shop. I think it was called like Budget Printing, Thai Budget Printing. I think they were located somewhere on Sunset, and they did a generic menu for all restaurants. They essentially put your restaurant's name and your address on there, and it was actually one of those to go, the ones you put in the doorknobs of homes. Everyone had the same menu. Everyone had the same combo. Everyone had the angel wing, the stuff like wings. Everyone had meat gob. And if you didn't have it, it was up to you to cross it off. So imagine them printing thousands of menus for you. And as a kid, like we couldn't make certain dishes. We would have to cross it off before, our parents hung it at someone's door. But it was essentially that. And I remember, like Makut limes, obviously expensive, can't find any exception, but our price point in East LA was, much lower. And so we had to use substitution. People ask me often, like pad Thai, like I saw it on the New York Times, you can use ketchup, you can use, I don't know, like sriracha and whatnot. And I'm like, whoa, how did all of that come about? And I remember having a conversation with my parents, and they're like, in the 80s, we didn't have tamarind. Like in the early 80s, late 70s, we didn't have tamarind. And the best and cheapest substitute that was available to us is ketchup. So therefore, that is why we use ketchup. And I remember speaking to Ajahn Ganjana about pad Thai using traditionally the manggung, or the shrimp head, shrimp paste. That's why it's orangey, yellowy, and it's synonymous to what pad Thai is to Americans. But when people order chicken pad Thai and it's still that orangey hue, what we use is actually paprika, which is from Mexico. And so that gives us that color. So we are kind of innovated in a way, and it's defined. Even today we use manggung at our restaurant, but we still have to put that paprika just as an added, because if the color is off, God forbid, then it's not like an authentic pad Thai that Americans are used to.
Right.
So I think all of this stems from, that shortage in supplies in the late 70s, early 80s, and now onward, even though the supply chain is much better, but we're known as that. So we kind of have to stick to that. My dad feels that if our pad Thai is like the color is faded, we won't be able to sell it. And so we still continue doing it today, and it's still the best seller. But those are the struggles of the past and still of today.
For my parents, at least especially, it's my mom was the cook, the Thai cook, obviously in our household. She grew up in the north, and she had like she used to call piman in her house, which was like a cook servant that they had, and she taught her all the kind of the food and all that. But then I guess when she came here, I don't know if it's like not shame, but it was kind of like there my mom was so afraid of like making her own restaurant, plus one, for the obviously all the hard work it would take, but it was just like she didn't think people would go for it if she would cook the food that she wanted to cook, when she done her own like kunkang and all that, like it's like really intense, and so she, they never really went that route of a restaurant. They just did certain foods very well at home, and like for friends and for family and whatever. It's just a small like following, especially with her nam. But one of the things I remember as a kid is like we weren't allowed in the kitchen because she didn't want us to do men, and then go to school and be like, embarrassed. She didn't want people to look down on Thai people because, like, here's this stinky kid. He smells like fish sauce or whatever. So a lot of the things, like when I grew up, was like seeing that as like, kind of made me question, like, oh, what it is to be Thai. It's like, and there wasn't really other Thai people around, right? So it was just us. It was just me and my brother in LA, and then like we had a couple cousins around, but like we didn't go to school with any Thai people, you know. Um, but I don't know. It's just that for us, I think that was the struggle, like for my parents, you know, trying to find that identity, you know, and like find the balance for us, for the children, to not bring down the community. I don't know. It was a weird dynamic growing up. But yeah, you know, it was just like one of those things.
Yeah, this is, you know, this it's why it's hard for me to accept when people, you know, would critique or maybe even, you know, fully criticize Thai restaurants and even chefs for like cooking inauthentic Thai food, or like, oh, they don't cook like the right Thai food. I'm like, you don't have any idea
Yeah.
decisions going into the food that comes on the plate. That's just beyond the food on the plate, right? Like, I'm pretty sure the food at home is different from the food here, and there's a reason for that. And so, you know, just thinking about that, I'm like, I really try to avoid making these like, oh, it's not authentic, they don't know really how to cook, because it's just, there are a lot of decisions to be made there. So that was, yeah, really, you know, eye-opening, but also not surprising, but just like really interesting to hear all your stories.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you see even, you know, Malaysian restaurants, Lao restaurants that are like the new kind of Asian restaurants that are popping up. As Thai is, you know, we kind of rode on the coattails of Chinese restaurants. Malaysian Lao restaurants are now riding on the coattail of Thai restaurants, where they have to serve pad Thai. I've seen, you know, in Malaysian restaurants and Lao restaurants, just to be that bridging gap, like chow mein was to our food, so that people are, you know, feel safe and familiar, and then hopefully try something, you know, something more of what they would cook for their family.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you know you've made it, you know, that
Right.
Noodles and Company serves pad Thai, right?
Yeah.
I just remember them adding that to the menu and thinking, we've made it.
Mm-hmm.
There are now appropriated versions of our food, you know, in this Boulder, Colorado-based noodle chain, and to be, I had very mixed feelings about it, obviously, but to be included into that big umbrella of noodles,
Yeah.
right? When people think of noodles, that are one of our dishes, however artificial and constructed it may be, but it's a propos that it says Thai in it, right? It's created to promote Thainess, and here we are at you know, a main chain serving Thainess by who knows what and however, but to their credit, they did use fish sauce, so kudos to them. I don't know, I can't speak about the tamarind.
No, but it's a testament to all the early Thai restaurants that, you know, take it kind of safe and kind of laid the foundation for like chefs for like me in Vanna now. Like we're going back to what we want to eat, and we're putting it out there for people, and the people are being very well. It's being well received. You know, it's people are receptive. You know, like who else is doing mukatat on the street in Westchester? You know, to me that's just like amazing, you know, and people like love it, you know, because it's like it's something that's unique. And you know, I'm like, even like Jitlada, you know, you look at they've been around for so long, but now they're getting more and more popular because they've just kind of like went crazy with their food and just made it as authentic as they could with the ingredients they have now, and people love it because as it is, like a lot of people are now traveling to places like Thailand and to like, you know, Vietnam, and like they're eating it, you know, where it's from, and it's like they want those flavors, authentic flavors. So, you know, kudos to all the previous generations for laying the foundation for the chefs of like our day now, that we can do whatever we want, and I can make my flavors as bold and as funky and as authentic as I want, and people will eat it. You know, people will definitely eat it now. You know?
And this goes back to our conversation we had like the other night about Nam.
Right.
If you don't know, Dan makes amazing creations with the Nam. I think one of my favorite was when you made it into like a nigiri, like a sushi bite, and we were mentioning that, you know, if this is a different world and a different paradox, that and Thai people or Asians were the first waves of immigrants to the US, you
Mhm.
know, people would be celebrating this nam, and not pepperoni on a, you know, pizza. It would be as common as any sausage that you would have, or bologna. It would be put onto, you know, sandwiches or on a rice to take to
Mhm.
school, and it would be very, very normal to have. But I know as a kid, it wasn't something that I would, my first choice of a lunch that I would bring to
Right.
school. But I'm happy that we're celebrating it now.
Right. Absolutely.
All
It's
right, well, let's
pride. It's pride and joy.
let's talk about some of the current challenges of Thai restaurants and Thai American chefs today.
Mm.
Dan, you want to stab that first, or you want me?
Oh, go ahead.
Uh,
I need to think on that one.
so, as a second generation restaurateur, with a 17-year-old restaurant, I've kind of inherited it about, I would say fully about 8 years ago. I still work actively with my mom, who's still in the kitchen many, many days a week. It's just so hard to get her out of there with the labor shortage and her amazing skill. I always say that she's like my best worker because she does like the job of 3 people. And you can't find that kind of work ethic nowadays. But I mean, mainly the struggle of being second generation is the side of my parents kind of letting go. And you know, when I want to put on a certain dish, like my sister and I did a dish like a lobster roll, and they're like, "Wait, is that Thai? How are you going to make that Thai?" But we're like, we identify with it. We want to make it kind of like a yum, and put it on a bread roll that my sister baked. And you know, my parents are still very much traditionalists in a way that they don't know what traditionalist really is. After speaking to Ajahn Ganjana, like, what is that? You know, what are they trying to sell, or what was sold to them? What Kool-Aid did they drink out of that made them feel like this is Thai and this is not? But slowly, I think over the years, like we made a nampik ong lasagna, and my dad was like, "What, nampik ong lasagna? What are you making? You're
Yeah.
putting cheese with nampik ong, which is northern, and you're putting pasta in it? Are you, you know, this is blasphemy." And after they try it, I mean, food is food. And at the end of the day, I always tell them, like, really, what is Thai food? Like, what is Thai food? And my parents couldn't say. And so my brother concluded Thai food is what Thai people eat. So regardless of what it is, like if you can eat it, that is Thai food. Because you have in Thailand like green curry pizza, which is so mainstream, feels so Thai. We had a privilege of cooking with a Thai top chef a few months ago, and her boundaries, like she had no boundaries. She embraces, you know, her French training, but she also embraces the traditional Thai cooking, and she kind of puts it together. But for me, I'm like, and my sister, we have that struggle with, you know, mentally what our parents have kind of put into our head of what is Thai and what we can do. And I think it comes from a bit of fear for them, you know, doing something safe and that has been trial and true, and has, you know, gone through the test of time. Works, it pays the bills. They don't want us to rock the boat, you know. And versus being super creative, I think that is something. And I think for the general, you know, community in LA at least, it's welcoming. I think a lot of young Thai American chefs. Someone I admire is Justin of Anajak Thai, who is, you know, shaking things up. I think the other day he did a cheese mango sticky rice, which is, you know, very bold, and I commend him for just pushing the boundary of having that conversation, of doing something a little different, and you know, being his authentic self. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
then
Uh-huh.
Dan, as a Thai American French trained chef, do you find that you have some similar struggles?
Oh, absolutely. I was just gonna say, I struggle a little bit with identity as far as am I being true to my heritage, my Thainess? But what I've come to realize, me being a like classically trained French cook, a chef, that's one side of it, and then I learned in Japanese restaurants. That's, I'm only just beginning to skim the surface of like learning or getting back into cooking authentic Thai food, but the struggle is I'm doing it from memory, because like I said, my mom is not really a resource anymore. But it's just like my brother and I always try to like decipher these dishes that our mom made for us, that really evoke those memories of happiness and, childhood and all that nostalgia. But what I've come to realize is that, it's not being like untrue to myself. It's just like, I should be able to take from all the things that I've learned and to make just good food. Like Vanna said, it's what we want to eat, right? So even while I was at Tartine, I'm bringing like very Thai flavors to uh American style cafe, and people were very receptive and loved it. Justin actually, said something on like one of those infatuation interviews or something. He's like, he named Tartine Sycamore like one of the top 5 Thai restaurants in LA, because they asked him which ones. He's like, it's like low key a secret Thai restaurant, because my, like there's a Thai chef there. He's pushing the boundaries of like, what's acceptable and things like that. All that's changed now, but the concept I'm working with. The what?
The Thai joke on the tartine.
Yeah, I mean, I did joke. I did, cow nam cow tod on my menu, things like that. There was just like people were like blown away with it. But this new concept I'm working on with Budonoki, it's like Vancouver style izakaya, which if you think about anything about Vancouver, it's just like an amalgamation of Asian communities. Like it's Thai, it's Japanese, it's Chinese, it's Malay, it's all of that. So it's like I can do whatever I want on the menu now. I'm doing a little bit of a Japanese with a little bit of Thai influence, whatever. I think this namjim would be great with like this grilled, fish or this grilled pork, whatever, and so I'm coming to terms with that, after a long battle with what I thought was authentic and what was real, So now I'm just like, screw it, I'm doing what I want, and it's gonna be good.
I love
It's gonna taste good. That's it, And if it doesn't, then we'll go back to the drawing board. We start again. That's why we do.
I mean, that's innovation, right?
Right.
And as a diner, obviously, I'm not in the kitchen anymore, at least outside of my home, and to take what I've learned historically, right, and how I grew up as a Thai American, 1.5 gen Thai American who grew up in a Thai restaurant, but also my mother and her colleagues were really kind of embedded in the circle of Thai studies. So we were privileged in that we met so many foreigners who really wanted Thai things because that's their academic focus, that's their academic interest, and that's like a weird niche market, right, for a Thai restaurant. And Madison hosts the Southeast Asian Studies Institute, and so there would be a flood of people coming to Madison for 8 weeks to learn intensive Thai language. Wow. And they wanted, right, in a way it was their immersion language, and they would come to my mom's restaurant because of her academic ties and like practice their Thai and trying to eat her food, because that's the instructors told them that this, if you wanted to taste something as close as you would when you go to Thailand, you go to Sukhothai. And the fact that it's named Sukhothai is interesting because my mom, we are not northern people, right? Like I grew up in Bangkok, my mom, but she wanted, as an academic, she wanted a name, one that says Thai, and 2, for people to ask what it meant. Right? So, because she's a professor, she's a teacher. So people would ask, what is Sukhothai? And she said, well, funny you should ask. It's the very first Thai empire and kingdom, in 1292. And so I had this spiel that, like what Joy said, people would call and ask what Thai food was. people would ask us, as I'm calculating their totals or whatever, what is Sukhothai anyways? And I would get to tell them like the history of the Thai alphabet and the whole shebang. And the innovation of it, when I went back to Thailand as an adult, right, to do my field work for my PhD studies, and I saw that Thai chefs were just doing whatever, right? And the little box that we all grew up in as Thai Americans, that's so well defined, right? It's not a perforated edge of Thainess, right? We didn't grow up with perforated edges for the boundaries of Thainess. It's not permeable, it's not malleable, it's this thing. And to go to Bangkok, to do my graduate research and see that people were doing like green curry stir fry with spaghetti noodles. I was like, what is happening? I was like, they can do that? But then, as our conversation earlier, it was like, they can do whatever they want because Thai food is what Thai people eat.
Right.
And that was so freeing for me as someone who, was struggling kind of to define their Thainess, like in a very academic, like nerdy, historical way. I'm going to know everything about Thainess so that my Thainess could never be questioned, right? And would go to the side of the street vendors and they were just like, yeah, pat macaroni. And I was like, what is pat macaroni? I'm like, why is macaroni in everything? And also the noodles you're using is not technically macaroni, it's rotini, but okay, you're like really, and I want to see that kind of innovation. So thank goodness for you guys, or Buddha, I should say. Thank Buddha for you guys.
As long as it has the 5 tastes, right? The 5 rot.
Yeah.
I love this conversation because, I think even as, someone just even outside of food, right? As someone who kind of struggled with their own Thai American identity, right? One of the big turning points in my life, and I'm, thinking about everything you all just said, right? I think one of the big turning points was, taking kind of ethnic studies classes and realizing that, this idea of like a national identity or even individual identity is like never fixed, right? And so once I realized like, okay, what it means to be Thai is always going to be unsettled. And like, that makes me feel good. That makes me, in a weird way, knowing that Thai American identity is always unsettled and always changing actually makes me feel grounded, right? In a way that I don't have to conform to this rigid idea of what being Thai means. There are different ways to be Thai. And at some level, it's not even up to me or us, right? Like society is going to see us as Thai. Like that's just what it's going to be. So I think kind of figuring that out in the ways that you all describe, right? Of like, what is authentic Thai food? What does it mean to be an authentic Thai? And I think if anybody has an answer to that, I would feel like that's very rigid, right? Like you can't define and pin down. Even Thai food, like 2 neighbors in Thailand would cook a same dish differently. So what are you talking about when you say authentic, Thai cuisine? And and I say that, but at the same time, I can understand when Vanda said, there's a fear for like the older generation, right? Of like losing Thainess, going back to what Kanjana said, right? So I get the fear because the fear is, you don't want to lose what makes the country unique or different. And you kind of move towards defining it in these very fixed, hard ways because you don't want to be colonized or you don't want to be completely erased. And so I get the impulse to want to be like, no, Thainess has to be this, 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 and this. And if you put, if you turn it into lasagna or if you make it, into, sashimi, then it's not Thai and we're losing our, I get the fear that like all of a sudden it doesn't mean anything anymore.
Mark, I'm wondering if it has to do with something with being immigrants, like our parents being immigrants and something having to hold on to something that they had to leave. Like I can't even imagine, in the late 70s, early 80s, having to leave my homeland, pre-internet days, and
that struggle was real,
right? Like bringing everything that you have in the luggage you can carry to come to a country that you know no one or very few people, and the language you can't, you know, effectively communicate in, like, I can't even imagine. So holding on to whatever tradition that is, you know, however weird that we think it is, maybe is their only like anchor.
No, absolutely. And 100% agree. And I think even to add to that, great point, right? I think if anybody was untraditional, it would be the migrants. They left Thailand. And so the process of like leaving and deciding, I don't want to live in Thailand, I want to go to the United States, then you kind of double down, right? Now you're like, well, now I got to like really be Thai. But I'm like, Thai people in Thailand would call you the most inauthentic right now because you left.
You're the black sheep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's kind of like you have to kind of double down on that to say like, okay, I need to really claim my roots now because I felt like I subconsciously even, right? Like I felt like I left. And how do I make sense of that for myself? If I'm so Thai, why would I leave Thailand? So you kind of do this process with yourself. So absolutely, Glenda, I think for sure.
And if you zoom out, you know, and just go beyond even just the Thai community, looking at just diaspora and people who are outside of their home cultural linguistic context, right? You see this type of holding on extremely tightly. So if we go to the extreme spectrum of that, you see the Amish, right, who came in the 1800s, and they dress like they're from the 1800s. They speak like they're from the 1800s, right? So the German that they speak, that what we call Pennsylvania Dutch, which is German, it's amazing because they held on so tight that they are still in the 1800s, right? So as a community, if we want to grow, right, however we want to grow, and I love that our community is so diverse and so large and so scattered. And I'm only saying that now as an adult. Obviously, as a child growing up in Wisconsin, like I really wanted another Thai person around that wasn't my sister or my mom. But you know, our community, I think, is old enough now, right, in the United States to acknowledge and accept differences. So there are regional cuisines coming out, right? There are northern dishes and southern dishes. And I don't think without the passage of time, without the sacrifices of the first generation, that we would have room. We would have room to do that now. And I think you can look at any other cuisine, like Chinese cuisine. There wasn't room for a Yunnanese restaurant, right? Or a Sichuan hot pot specifically, right? 10, 20 years ago, there wasn't. But the fact that we get to grow and we have room to grow and reinterpret what it is to be Thai, what Thai food is, and how we want to do it, I think that's amazing. So in a way, we're almost getting to the same point that the Thai chefs in Thailand maybe are at, right? Where our Thainess maybe someday won't be questioned and we can just do whatever we want. This is just me full fantasy dreaming now, but someday, right? Someday.
Everybody who's listening is going to be like, they're not real Thai people.
Well, the time is now. Like, we're doing it. We're out here.
Thai people, they're not Thai. So I'm going to say that for them now. Like, we know that's coming. Oh, these aren't real Thai people. They don't know what they're talking about.
I have a PhD. I have a piece of paper that tells me that I'm Thai. I teach people how to speak and be Thai. So, like, you know, that's they can come for me, and I have a title, but I don't. I'll stand up for y'all.
There's one more struggle that I really want to talk about is the perception of Thai food to the general American public, where Thai food is often deemed as, you know, cheap and has to be fast. And I think either Professor Mark or Professor Ganjana mentioned before of, you know, amongst Asian food rankings and the price that people would pay, you know, you have Japanese food at your highest end and often receiving those, you know, marks of Michelin and highly accredited awards. And then you have Thai food, which often lands at the lower end of the spectrum in terms of price and value. I think this is definitely a struggle of me personally as I run, a Thai restaurant business and how we price. Um, would love to talk to everyone about that and your personal struggles of, Thai food having to be cheap and having to be fast.
I think it comes to elevating it, there are people in Thailand that do it, like Chef Tam does that, she elevates that cuisine. She presents it in a different way. She stays true to like the flavors and the backgrounds and like, what makes that dish true and tasty, but she just presents it in a different way. And I think we just have to slowly change that kind of like that mentality. And it's just gonna take time. I try to do that sometimes with my food, like I'm always talking about making a tom yum soup consomme, you know. People always kind of like when you order a tom yum soup, it's like all the ka and like the takai and all that stuff that's just swimming in there. It's like for me, like it's great, but like you don't need that. It's served its purpose, it's given its flavor. But what if I, used like a French method and made the raft and clarified this stock. Now you're just eating this beautiful, like clean stock that's like mind-blowing flavors, and then that's it. I think it's just we just have to be creative and find that way. And then you do something like that, I think people will be like, oh shit, this guy's elevating the game a little bit, and it's like it feels more value, because a lot of our Thai food is like, when you hit it in the wok and it's done, it's like 2 seconds. So that's kind of what it is. It's quick and it's fast and it's inexpensive. It's like working food. But I think we as chefs can slowly elevate that game a little bit and bring it up to that next level. Kind of break that mold.
And historically, there's always been a distinction in Thai cuisine, as far as records have gone anyways, between home food and special occasion foods, right? And as immigrants, I don't think we were allowed that distinction in the beginning. The distinction's very clear in Thailand, right? Ahan ban, ahan wang, they are not the same. And the amount of work that goes into certain dishes is for a kitchen that has a full staff, right? And French food is afforded that distinction because of the historical kind of dominance that it's had in Western cuisine, right? I mean, there are things that you are not making at home because it requires a full staff and it requires 2 days of prep. But when certain Thai dishes cross the ocean, we lost that distinction. And, if we get to bring that back so people know, like price point wise, of course it makes sense because they're side of the street food. Like you said, it's in and out of the wok. People have 30 minutes to eat. They're on the go. Totally makes sense. Like that the price point would be lower. But if you're doing things that takes a full staff and 2 days of prep, then there's no reason that should be the same. And I would love for one to see that distinction, come to the US.
Right.
Yeah, and I think another part of this, and I agree with both of you, and I think, I think American consumers and eaters have a responsibility as well. I think we have to detach and separate authenticity with cheap, and especially when it comes to Asian food. I mean, this happens with Mexican food as well, right? It's like the cheaper the tacos, the more authentic it is, right? And so like I think that is so deeply connected for a lot of diners that like the cheaper the food is, the more authentic it is. And so if you do the tom yum consomme, right, then it's kind of like, well, I don't know if that's like authentic anymore because it should be cheap, right? And like if I'm paying this much, does this like not Thai food anymore? Is it going somewhere else? So I feel like they, eaters also have a responsibility to say, you know what, authentic or Thai food can be different than what I think it is, and I have to be willing to pay more for authentic Thai food that's new, authentic Thai food. So I think there's a responsibility there too, right? That like the chefs and the restaurateurs and you all can only do so much, but eaters have to disconnect those ideas.
I think within our own community too, I feel that, Thais eating at Thai restaurants and judging the food because of the price point is also like probably the hardest thing. I know that being on the West Side, we provide benefits for our employees. We provide fair, livable wages. And when people, come from maybe the Hollywood area into Westchester and they see the price that we charge, which I don't feel is high, feels high when compared to Thai town. And, educating our diners and educating our community is really important, I think, to push the boundaries of the possibilities of what Thai food can be. I was at a restaurant, I think 2 weeks ago, when they serve like their dessert menu, their entire dessert menu. The price point was higher than my pad Thai. The cheapest item on the dessert menu was like $16 and was a soft serve. I talked to Dan about this already, a soft serve. And I'm like, what am I doing wrong in life when I am selling my bestseller for less than a soft serve? Like, what is going on? And so it made me kind of think like, there's so much that goes into a pad Thai, people don't know about it. And that soft serve use, like special milk from, procured and chocolate from a certain place. And they educate their diners of that. And so I think the burden is now on me to do that and raise that level of what we can do with Thai food and how we can charge.
Mm-hmm.
Very Buddhist way to think, right? It's not them, it's me.
No, it also comes from that like poor immigrant like mentality. My dad is always complaining about how expensive Thai food is now, and I'm like, Dad, it's just like so expensive to make this food now. It's like he doesn't understand a lot of the times, and it's disconcerting sometimes because like he won't eat at certain restaurants anymore. It's like it's too expensive and it's not as good as it used to be and it's too small. Like blah blah blah. I'm just like, Dad, like the times have changed. Food is getting more expensive. Like Vanda says, like there's so much that goes behind a plate of pad Thai. Besides the ingredients, it's the rent, it's the labor, it's all these things that people don't anticipate and don't appreciate, and like hopefully now that this pandemic or whatever is kind of like getting people more of that understanding that food costs a little bit more, and they're willing to pay it, so I think we're moving in the right direction.
Well, thank you everybody. This was such a great informative conversation. I think that everybody watching will learn a lot from it. And I thank you all for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Great.
you.
ครับ
สวัสดีค่ะ